Before this video begins, I do want to preface it by saying that this is a remaster of a video I did like a month ago or so. Link's Awakening 1993 versus Link's Awakening DX from 1998. That video acted sort of as a documentary of the Game Boy, the latter half of the 90s, with the Game Boy Color, and some of the major differences between Link's Awakening and its Game Boy Color re-release. That was the first half of the video. The second half of the video was a part of my Link's Awakening playthrough, where I played through the Color Dungeon. Now that Let's Play's over, I think I want to take the time and fix some of the issues that were wrong with that video and expand on some things that I either missed or just did not know about at the time. And take a time machine into the future, which is now the past, and cover the third and final ingredient in the Link's Awakening saga. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all enjoy this remastered edition of a Trash Venger classic. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. Normally I'd start off this video by recapping our previous adventures in Koholin Island during our last episode together, but we're not going to do that this time, because we are not continuing with Link's Awakening's main story this time around. Instead, we're going to be tackling the Color Dungeon, a completely optional hidden dungeon that was first added to Link's Awakening DX for the Game Boy Color. But wait a minute, Link's Awakening DX? Color Dungeon? Color graphics? What does this all mean? Well, since you so nicely asked, allow me to try and explain. But first, we need to go back to 1991, when The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past released to critical and, most importantly, commercial success, because that means more money! Led by programmer Kuzaki Morita, he and other members of the development team would gather after hours to experiment with development kits from Nintendo's newly fangled handheld system known as the Game Boy, which was just released 2 years prior. And though it sold like absolute hotcakes essentially from the start, the Game Boy is quite the complicated little piece of hardware when you look back at it.
They said it wasn't humanly possible. All the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy. It's portable, it's in stereo, and its games are interchangeable. Game Boy comes complete with batteries and the outrageous new game Tetris. And for head-to-head competition, use Video Link and blow your opponent away. Game Boy, only from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, portable power.
While this commercial was totally
Outrageous.
the Game Boy wasn't all perfect. For example, the bulky design of the system itself, the lack of a backlight, so essentially playing games in the dark or not in perfect lighting conditions is pretty much impossible, and the most infamous of all, the complete lack of color. Every game is in complete monochrome. Surely such heavy negatives would lead to this system being trounced by its competitors. Sega and Atari had their own handhelds, complete with color and a couple of Sonic games, I guess. It also apparently had a pretty good portable version of Lemmings and a TV tuner that allowed you to watch analog TV. I mean, that's not even close to being the weirdest Game Boy accessory though. I mean, shit. The Pedi Sedate? An accessory for the Game Boy that was given to hospitals that allowed children to play video games as they were sedated? I want to be sedated by a Game Boy. But the Atari Lynx and Sega Game Gear were absolutely destroyed by the technologically inferior Game Boy, for a multitude of reasons, but starting off, the price point. The Atari Lynx, which released the very same year in 1989, debuted at a price point of $179.99. Translated to 2026 dollars, that is a whopping $474.34. The Sega Game Gear, released 2 years later than both systems, debuted at a price point of $150, which translated into 2026 dollars would be $359.90, which doesn't seem too bad, but one fatal flaw these two systems have was the battery life. These two systems took 6 AA batteries to operate, with a battery lifespan averaging 3 to 5 hours? Even if the Game Gear is cheaper than the Lynx, you're gonna blow your difference eventually just keeping this thing supplied with a daily supply of batteries. That's when we get to the Game Boy, released in 1989 at a price point of $89.99. In modern dollars, that would be $237.16. Already quite a bit cheaper than the other two options. Where the Game Boy really shined was its battery life. While it did need 4 AA batteries to operate, it was able to provide you with 30 hours of gameplay before needing another charge. So while the Game Boy did struggle technologically in its era, the Atari Lynx and the Sega Game Gear, while being technological marvels for their time, just weren't ready to deal with the consequences of that. So from a price point and a convenience standpoint, they lost out to Nintendo's shitty little brick. But it wasn't just the price, nor the battery that led to the Game Boy's domination. There was also the games.
Do it.
For the first time, it was possible to enjoy games on the same scale as their console counterparts on the go, and this small little beast had quite the strong library when it was all said and done. To begin, there was the Super Mario Land trilogy, with some of the strangest aspects I've ever seen in a Mario game, along with some of the absolute catchiest tunes. Metroid made its jump to the portable system with Metroid 2: The Return of Samus, one of the most important games, lore-wise at least, in the Metroid series. There was also the Donkey Kong Land trilogy, which are often mistaken as ports of the SNES originals, but these 3 games have fully original levels and, in some cases, even fully original storylines. And yes, the Game Boy was when Pokemon took over the world, with the Generation 1 bundle of games selling nearly a combined 46 million units. That sounds all well and good, but as we all know, no Nintendo system would have been complete without its own flagship Zelda. So let's circle back to where we first began. By this point, A Link to the Past has been released to the public, and experiments with this new Game Boy development kit have started to gain some real results. So A Link to the Past director Takashi Tezuka gathered the Zelda team up and pitched to Nintendo higher-ups a port of A Link to the Past for the Game Boy. But as development began, Tezuka and the team began to realize that they were feeling creatively unsatisfied with such a project, so it began to evolve into an original game. A Link to the Past scriptwriter Katsuki Tanabe and Yoshiaki Koizumi were given a strict set of guidelines to exclude common Zelda set pieces like the Triforce, Ganon, the Kingdom of Hyrule, and even Princess Zelda herself. With this new direction in hand, and the team assembled, development would begin. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening was released June 6th of 1993, coming to America a few months later. Early concerns of the Game Boy not being able to handle a fully fledged Zelda adventure were proven to be false, as Link's Awakening was every bit the game of its predecessors on consoles, and in some cases even surpassing them. But it wasn't all perfect. There was one criticism that Link's Awakening just could not seem to shake: the lack of color. Throughout the 90s, the Game Boy continued to sell strong, which led Nintendo to grow wary about discontinuing such strong-selling hardware. There were revisions like the Game Boy Pocket, a slimmed-down Game Boy that only required 2 AA batteries, No, past self. The Game Boy Pocket takes 2 AAA batteries. Dumb fucking moron. And got rid of the original's bulk. And the Game Boy Light, which was released only in Japan, which gave the screen finally a backlight. And while these revisions were nice in their own way, they didn't solve the Game Boy's #1 problem: the monochromatic screens. And by 1998, developers were starting to lose interest in creating new games for the aging hardware. And with a new handheld competitor hitting the market in 1997, Bandai's The Wonder Swan, Nintendo decided to finally push forward with the Game Boy Color. It wasn't that simple though. Even though Nintendo was very conservative in moving off of the Game Boy, as a company they were always thinking about their next generation handheld system. The first of these efforts was an early 90s prototype codenamed Project Atlantis, which featured a colored screen and a powerful 32-bit processor. This prototype ended up getting scratched multiple times throughout the 90s, for a multitude of reasons, like it being too bulky and far too expensive to manufacture. Though the idea of a 32-bit handheld would be revisited in the near future, resulting in the Game Boy Advance, the final iteration of the Game Boy. Do I even need to talk about what comes next? Nintendo's original plan to succeed the Game Boy, being the Virtual Boy. The story of the Virtual Boy has been told countless times. It is a terrible system. Now I know that's a hot take, but whether you're talking about the ugly red and black graphics, which leads to most people getting a headache, or some other type of health issue like motion sickness, after only like 15 minutes of playing this thing. The fact that it was marketed as the next line of the portable Game Boy systems, hence the name Virtual Boy.
My ass is portable.
The Virtual Boy is a sad story. A story of great ideas, great innovation, but it collapsed very quickly. I don't want to spend too long on this because this could be a documentary in and of itself, but to go over this pretty quickly, a company named Reflection Technology, basing themselves out of Massachusetts, produced a working prototype of the technology that would eventually become the Virtual Boy, and then showed it off to the major companies at the time: Hasbro, Mattel, Sega. Meanwhile, Nintendo was all over it. It didn't take long for them to strike a deal with RTI, granting them the license for their display technology. Thus, the VR32 was born. That's when things start to go downhill. First, as a company, Nintendo was already knee-deep in developing their next home console, the Nintendo 64, then known as the Ultra 64. Nintendo quickly found it obvious that producing a fully blown headset with a colored display with head tracking was just not going to be reasonable financially. Besides, apparently the original head tracking display led to an uptick in motion sickness, along with worries of kids developing a lazy eye. Now, maybe this is all true. In fact, it probably is true. But the fact of the matter is, the Virtual Boy already is a disaster for your health. So instead of the head tracking model that we could have gotten, instead was replaced with the red and black, unportable design that we now have today. And to circle back, the Nintendo 64 was starting to take up a lot of internal resources at Nintendo. So the team that was working on the Virtual Boy were really in such a tough place. Their project just kept getting downscaled and downscaled. Now this isn't an excuse in any way for the Virtual Boy. It's truly awful. It was panned both commercially and critically, and only lasted a year before getting retired, and only like 22 games or so were ever made for the thing. But I understand it now. I think I could find it in my heart to forgive it. At least I would, but then they started selling the goddamn thing again. This is either the absolute funniest thing that a company has ever done, or it's just the downright evilest. I mean, in this case, there's no in between.
Hey kid, where's my lunch money?
You haven't been flossing. You haven't been flossing.
Get a job.
Escape to a world of color for each and every Game Boy game. New Game Boy Color.
The Game Boy Color released October 21st of 1998 at a price point of $80, essentially the same as its predecessor. Along with obviously the color display, the Game Boy Color received an internal upgrade as well, with a CPU running at up to twice the speed with 4 times the memory. The Game Boy Color was also backwards compatible with every game developed for the original Game Boy. And speaking of original Game Boy games, the idea of simple colorized re-releases of those games were a no-brainer, but Nintendo actually prohibited such releases, requiring developers to add meaningful gameplay additions to the old games. Among those vying for this treatment was Link's Awakening, a chance to finally realize the island of Koholint in color. With the Zelda team hard at work at putting the finishing touches on The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, the director's role was instead handed to Yoshiniro Tushiyama, who along with a small team began work on Link's Awakening DX for the Game Boy Color. Though Link's Awakening DX would probably be more considered a remaster than a full-blown remake, there was still quite a lot of content that was added to this game. For example, the camera shop, a whole new side quest, and a whole new collectible. Certain events will trigger this photographer to take your picture. There are a total of 12 photographs, and funny enough, each one of them can be printed using the Game Boy printer accessory. The devs also took a bunch of time to fix some glitches and bugs. Thank God! What the fuck? And interestingly enough, the owl statues and the stone beaks that I've been finding in these dungeons throughout my playthrough were originally stone tablets and stone tablet fragments in the original Link's Awakening. I'm curious. Oh, there he goes! There's my guy! Hey, Mon. You know me, I like short names the best. It can display millions of polygons. This guy right here, if you spray magic powder on a buzz blob, it turns into this thing. That seems all well and good. It gives stupid little short sayings like this that make no sense. In the German release of this game, and specifically the German release, only found in the 1993 monochrome Game Boy release, these guys say some pretty vulgar things. For instance, in German, these guys can say, "Never without a condom. Give me your juice, I'll give you mine. Stop the war, give peace a chance." I don't know how that snuck by. I really don't. For Link's Awakening DX, sadly those were taken out, but that is just fucking hilarious. This is a Zelda game that technically brings up the existence of bras and condoms. Alright, I think that does it. We're all caught up now. The only thing really left to talk about is the color dungeon. This is the point in the original video where I diverged off and transitioned into a more traditional Let's Play type style. But since we're not going to be doing that this time around, why don't we just quickly scan over the color dungeon and see what it's truly about. Located in one of the graves of the Koholint Island graveyard is the color dungeon. You have to go to the library and find the specific order in which you have to push them in, but before long, you'll be able to find your way into the color dungeon. In reality, there's really not much to the color dungeon. Most of the novelty just comes from the fact that this is the only dungeon in the game designed with the idea of being able to see color. Hey, this monster looks the same as this tile on the floor. Oh, throw this orb into the matching hole. Or don't. Oh, look at this. This is the 4th puzzle where I have to match the statues. You get the idea. The one thing the color dungeon does have is 3 completely original bosses built from scratch. The first of those being the giant buzz blob. The second is a Hinox made of stone named Avalok. and the dungeon boss itself being the hard-hit beetle. None of these bosses are really anything to write home about, but I do think they fit in the collection of Link's Awakening's bosses. Really, the more interesting thing of this dungeon comes from the prize you receive at the end. Instead of receiving an instrument of the siren, you're instead greeted by a great fairy who offers you the power of color in the form of either the blue tunic or the red tunic. The red tunic doubles the damage of Link's attacks and sends enemies flying when he hits them. Great for a player that wants to go on offense. The blue tunic, on the other hand, cuts the damage that Link takes by half. Perfect for a player who rather play on defense instead of being so aggressive. Much like the blue mail from A Link to the Past, but without that fucking amazing banana hat. Alright, I think that's all for Link's Awakening DX. Wait a minute. What do you mean we're not done yet? "20 years after its DX re-release, Link's Awakening had returned, this time built from the ground up with a new 3D and high-definition look. I know this remake tends to have its detractors, especially among fans of the original, but in my opinion, this is a remake done right. Everything you expect from the original is here and accounted for. The wonderful cast of characters, the plotline full of constant twists and turns, and most importantly, the weirdness that makes Link's Awakening Link's Awakening. When it comes to the changes and additions made to Link's Awakening on Switch, the list can get a little long, so instead I'm only going to talk about the changes that really you only care to hear about. Starting with a change you've actually already seen, the beautiful hand-drawn cutscenes that are featured both for the intro and the ending of the game. Just seeing these cutscenes again for the first time in 7 years just makes me sad that this style was never revisited in the future. Like a Zelda anime of some type that looks like this? Sign me up. Now that's not a diss to the old cutscenes from the Game Boy original. Far from it. Those are fantastic in their own way, of course. Man, I just love Link's little dopey face here. The next aspect of this remake I really want to highlight is the beautifully rearranged soundtrack. This time using a mixture of live instruments and even samples from the original Game Boy soundtrack. Again, I've heard some people lambast this new soundtrack as having butchered the original songs, and I just flat out don't agree in the slightest. Again, this is more of a subjective taste, so I don't really know how to describe this other than just saying I like it. Really, every song in my opinion was done justice. Actually, except one. The boss theme kind of sucks. Alright, let's go over a couple more interesting factoids about the soundtrack real quick. Angler's Tunnels track was flat out removed, thank God. That 12-second loop that just makes me think of a funnier YouTuber.
I'm in a cave, it's wet, I'm in a cave, it's dark.
Instead it was given a new song, incorporating the original theme into the background of the track rather than having it just be the track. The same thing can be said for Level 6's The Face Shrine. Another thing I really like that they changed is they actually gave Deathel a final boss theme. Nothing is more anticlimactic than the original fight ending with just the mini-boss theme that you've heard in every other dungeon in the game. It really does capture the foreboding nature of this thing, a creature made of nothing but nightmares. It's not the greatest song I've ever heard, but it definitely is leaps and bounds above the original. Moving away from the soundtrack, let's get into more just general gameplay changes and additions. Starting off a new file of Link's Awakening, and you could choose Hero Mode. First introduced in Skyward Sword, Heroes Mode is essentially a hard mode. Enemies will deal double damage and hearts just do not appear whatsoever in the game. If you watch the first handful of episodes of my Let's Play, fair to say I'm probably not suited for that challenge. I could see that coming. Hands down the best change by far in this version is the fact that the sword, shield, power bracelet, and Pegasus boots are always equipped and have their own dedicated buttons, thanks to the Switch Joy-Cons having more buttons than the original Game Boy. You get to spend far less time stopping and having to pause the game in order to switch between items. I feel like you don't even use your shield so much in this game because giving up just one of 2 item slots for this is just not worth it. Another A+ change, if you ask me, and hands down the biggest changes that were added to Link's Awakening on Switch, the sheer amount of collectibles that were added. In Link's Awakening on Game Boy, there are 12 heart pieces to collect. In the Nintendo Switch remake, that number has been increased to a whopping 32. As such, the amount of heart containers that you can get by the end of the game has been increased to 20 as opposed to 14 in the original game. Secret seashells. There are now 50 of them as compared to 26 in the original. A significant increase in the little bastards. Though they did add a seashell sensor after you turn in 15 at the Seashell Mansion, so I guess they did try to help us out there. And to add on to it, there are now 3 bottles that you can collect for your inventory. I was actually a little surprised to know that bottles weren't in the original game in the slightest, considering they just made their debut in A Link to the Past. Now for a few more minor, yet still pretty interesting changes I found. For starters, the shield design was updated to that of the Hylian shield, the design first established in Ocarina of Time. The idea of A Link to the Past Link using such an iconic Ocarina of Time item is really bizarre and kinda cool. The song Manbo's Manbo is now really useful. Instead of just warping you to one spot on the overworld, now can warp you to any of the warp points around the game. The fact that this wasn't a thing in the original is kinda shocking to me. And finally, up on our list of changes I wanted to cover, replacing the camera shot from Link's Awakening DX are the Chamber Dungeons, hosted by Dampe, the Gravekeeper from Ocarina of Time, and the Death Merchant for thousands and thousands of 100% speedruns. Basically, chamber dungeons are your own customizable dungeons that can be created using these things called chamber panels. Chamber panels are replicas of various rooms within the dungeons of Link's Awakening. In theory, this sounds like a fun little diversion as you try to piece together your own little dungeon. In practice, not so much. The first problem with this system is that, for one, just revisiting each dungeon room that you've already completed just really isn't that fun. So, why even use this system, you may ask? Because it's required for 100%. 2 heart pieces, a secret seashell, and one of the 3 newly added bottles. Those rewards coming from the 24 challenges you have to complete. So say the first challenge, you have to create a dungeon in the shape of a heart. Okay, this one in the shape of a sword, and this one in the shape of a shield, and then the monstrosity you just created has to then be completed. And the later challenges just make it even harder, putting restrictions on you like time limits and not being able to use your sword, and just some of these are straight marathons at the end. I've spent all of this segment just praising this remake for how much I love it, but man, am I not a fan of these chamber dungeons. Good idea in theory, bad in practice, I guess? I think I prefer DX's camera shop. Well, I think that about does it. Here at last, on the shores of the sea, comes the end of our fellowship. I guess I'm Gandalf in this scenario, and you're all my hobbits? Yeah, this is getting weird, I'm sorry. I guess the only question left to answer is, what version of Link's Awakening should you play? What version is the best version? In my opinion, quite frankly, there is not a wrong answer to this question. Mostly it comes down to personal preference. Each version has their pros and cons. You could be extremely nostalgic for the monochromatic visuals to the original. You could have gotten a Game Boy Color for Christmas one year and just have a love affair with Link's Awakening DX. Or perhaps you just discovered this game for the first time with its Switch remake. Really? Everyone's story here is valid. In my case at least, Link's Awakening has always kind of gone under the radar. I mean, think about it this way. Its prequel, was one of the most influential video games ever made. The game that released after it, one of the most influential games ever created. And then there's Link's Awakening, stuck in the middle with these two. Maybe it's just unfair that this game never got the praise that its prequel or sequel got, whether it be criticisms of the original's black and white graphics, or the fact that it released on a handheld system and not a home console. Regardless of the reason, the fact of the matter remains, this is a game worth remembering. But then again, verily, it be in the nature of dreams to end. Though someday, when we're all old and gray, we'll recall our old adventures on Koholint Island, and that memory must be the real dream.